So in the process of working through trauma, how we respond and how trauma affects our life, how we can work to start to shift our responses and heal these triggers that come up, in these opportunities that life has when we start to get agitated, when we start to have emotions that come up, when we start to react, when we get triggered, right? So triggers are a activation of our mental, emotional, and physical bodies that create a need to get something out. It can be something we feel, and then we try to hold in, or it can be something where we start to express it, right? We start to want to blame other people. We start to want to point fingers. We start to get into the victim mindset. So triggers are something that is not a real emotion. They are an emotion packed with trauma. Now, trauma isn't something that is done to us. Trauma is something that happens on the inside of us because of the environment we were in. Often, early on in life sets the stage for how we interpret later on in life, whether we create more trauma and attract more opportunity, right? Triggers are the opportunity to start unpacking the base layer of what we experienced as a child, what we experienced early on, or depending on how abstract we want to get, what we're carrying in our family lineage, what we're carrying energetically, can create a response inside of us. Now, this is linked to how we view the world, how we're viewing an interaction, how we're viewing a person interacting with us. Now, this view is influenced by these beliefs, what I call trauma beliefs that we have gained as part of our coping mechanism, part of the energy we're carrying, that starts to put us against people, put us against situations. We start to become the victim. We start to need to protect. Because in that need to protect, wherever we were at and however we created this internal trauma, we did it as a way of coping and protection, because in that time it wasn't safe. And however that situation was, however we were able to process it, it wasn't a place that we could handle. So our system locked in and protected. Often as children, things happen, we don't understand what's going on. So we get internal traumas because it's a bigger world than where we're at processing, or we're picking up family traits, past life stuff. There's a lot of layers that come into it. In this particular conversation, we're going to talk about this current world life that we are in and how our family emotional experiences and our physical and mental experiences create a packing in of a stored experience that starts to come up to the surface and interact with our current life. So when we start looking at unpacking traumas, what we start to understand is that just because you're feeling something doesn't mean it is real, present time, and that everything that's happening right now is your responses responding to everything that's current. Often your response is valid to something happening right now and amplified based on something that happened prior. So one of the biggest importance is starting to look at what's coming up, right? Starting to create a separation where I am experiencing this versus I am owning it, right? So a part of me is seeing this come up. A part of me is getting angry. A part of me is starting to get anxious. A part of me is starting to tighten up and shut down and collapse, right? Instead of I am. Because when we say accumulation language, or when we use whole words, right? Absolutes. I am means that the entirety of you is in this experience, and that's not necessarily true. So parts of you are having an experience, and the truth of you is actually the one listening, feeling it, hearing it, observing it. So it's in these multi-layers that we need to start separating out so that we have a little space and room so that we can start processing. So it's really important to start changing language and view of what we're actually feeling and experiencing, because what if everything you felt, experienced, and believed about yourself wasn't you? What if it was learned behavior? What if it was program behavior? What if it was society taught? What if it was trauma influenced, right? How do you actually know who you truly are if we don't start unpacking and questioning what is really my belief? What is really going on? How do I really feel? Why am I feeling this? What's coming up? So And what can I learn about it? So let's go into the process of unpacking. So when we look at the process of unpacking, it's first important to start noticing there's a part of me getting anxious, or there's a part of me feeling like I'm going to collapse, or there's a part of me that wants to lash out, right? So that's what we observe. We notice the reaction or the trigger emotion. We notice what's coming up. The reaction is, I want to blame somebody else. The trigger emotion is, I'm feeling angry. Now, the event could be somebody just didn't call you back, or your boss had a bad day and you took it personal, right? Often we take things personal and amplify the situation. So the unpacking process is first to observe, to understand something is coming up, and to stop yourself from acting and reacting. So this is an internal process before we then express it externally, because we want to get to a place where we are choosing how we're relating to the external world, and we are choosing how we would like to experience life, not being run by our triggers. So first process is to notice. Second process is the work. This is processing the trigger. So in noticing that we observe the trigger, right? The event that's coming up is you're mad at your boss. And the event that happened in your interpretation was that your boss didn't appreciate your work. In that, right? That's the story. In that, you got angry, right? So the story, or like call the drama, and the trigger emotion, anger. So now let's look at the trauma response, the reaction. You want to defend yourself. You want to call him out. You want to make him resolve the situation. That is a survival response. It's actually healthy, though it's not appropriate for the situation. Because when we are feeling violated, it is a real healthy response to want to protect. But in the situation, in being conscious-minded, we have to decide, is this appropriate to want to defend and protect? Am I really at risk, right? Am I really going to get hurt? So in this trauma response, we're observing what our brain is telling us we want to do. Now, if we look at the trauma belief, we have these list of things we're starting to learn about ourselves, right? We can think about our childhood. Were you appreciated? Were you validated? Were you seen? Were you heard? Were you loved? How were those things coming about, right? We can start to reflect on our childhood and get a list of trauma beliefs that are derived from what we didn't get as children. So in this trauma response that you have with your boss, wanting to defend, call yourself out, make him resolve, the belief may be that behind that, you don't feel good enough. And that you aren't enough. So what's happening is underneath the pain is the need to protect. The wound is that there is a belief stuck inside of you that you are not enough. And when we unpack it, that's where we put the energy in. We acknowledge all these layers coming up, but we sit inside with self, feeling the belief we have been carrying that we are not enough. And we feel the pain and hurt of that. And we start to be present with the wound. The more present we can feel the pain of that wound, the smaller the wound gets, and no longer will bubble up to the surface and want us to react to our boss. So in that process, this is how we start to unpack and sit with the wound.